Hello everyone, in this session we will be running through the Washtronic float system, our mechanism that keeps the pressure constant. We'll be looking at how and why it works and why it's good for the panels. Remarkably, there are still some systems on the market for cleaning without a floating mechanism. Now in my opinion that is pretty dangerous for the modules, but it's also actually tiring for an operator having to kind of adjust every time you go over a bump. There are also units on the market that have sensors for measuring kind of the distance to the module, keeping that constant, changing the angles, etc. Sunbrush, however, uses a nitrogen accumulator float system, and we actually use no sensors for that regulation. Now, of course, most people don't know what a nitrogen accumulator float mechanism is, and that's what this course is for. Very simply, the nitrogen accumulator float system removes the majority of weight from the brush, and you only leave 8 to 10 kilos per meter of brush sitting on the panel. And very simply, I often use this analogy. Imagine I put my hand on this panel right now. I can drop my shoulder or lift my shoulder however fast or quickly I like, but my hand is not going to go through that module because it maybe only weighs 2 kilograms. And in the same way, with our float mechanism with the Sunbrush, because that brush only weighs 8 kilograms per meter sitting on the module, if the tractor drops or lifts up, you've only got that 8 kilos sat on the panel. And yeah, watch this quick video to show it in action. I have here set up a very simple and easy demonstration for why this system works. Got a weight scale here, lifting from the center of the brush, very closely to the center of the brush. And of course, this brush, without the float system working, weighs approximately 200 kilos. Whereas with the float system active, I can lift it up by hand and shows a weight around that low 20 kilogram ballpark. That means, of course, that when the float system is active, we only have 20 kilograms sitting on the panel, and regardless of that tractor undulation, regardless of the ground contours, we'll only have that 20 kilograms there sat on the panel. Before we go ahead and look into each component of the float mechanism and kind of how they work together, I thought we'd watch some videos on real life sites of the float system working. In this first video, we see the John Deere tractor approaching kind of a water channel that's been built to manage the water flow on the site. We see the tractor will drop about 18 inches, but that Sunbrush will stay with the same pressure on the module and will keep cleaning without even needing the tractor to stop at all, hardly even slows down. This is essential on lots of these sites when these water channels are very common. This next video shows the skid steer bounce, but that brush keeps the pressure on the panel. Here it is in slow motion. We'll see that water tank will drop about 1.5 feet, and that brush will stay there on the module, not even changing its pressure as it's cleaning. This is the perfect example a human could not change quick enough. Now we've seen that the brush works and floats over those ground conditions, I thought we could look at the different components that make up the system, and we'll eventually, how we set it up and how we run it. We've got 4 main components. There are many more components kind of covering the whole machine, but here are the main 4. Firstly, a manual hand pump. Now this manual hand pump is how we pressurize the system when you arrive on site. Secondly, we have a nitrogen accumulator that essentially stores and maintains the hydraulic pressure. We have a float cylinder that is the force that is pushing up against the brush, essentially taking away the weight. And fourthly, the joystick, that is what we use to turn the float mechanism on and off. The orange button is what we use to do that. When the light is on, the float system is active, and we can lock out the float system if we need when we're coming to the end of the row, so we don't just drop off. We'll now actually go out to the warehouse and we'll run through the process of kind of how we pressurize it up, and you can see it in action. Now, before we start pressurizing the system, we must ensure the system is turned on. Now, you turn on the system by pressing the orange button on the joystick, as shown in this video. So I'm now here in the tractor cab of the multi-hog, and here we have the joystick on my right hand. Now, this orange button is what we use to turn on and off the float mechanism, and you will see as I turn this button on, the orange solenoid through the windshield turns on, off, on, and you see that orange light from the front. Of course, we will leave that on so we can proceed with the demonstration. And that will then open up the solenoid, which will enable you to put the hydraulic fluid into the float mechanism. Now, the way we pump it, there's a handle that sits in the brush. It then slides into this pump, and we are then able to pump by hand with using this handle. Now, essentially what we're doing is pulling hydraulic fluid from a reservoir in the frame and putting it into the accumulator here. In turn, that is pushing pressure against this cylinder up against the bottom of the boom. And as we'll see, as I pump, we are building pressure in this gauge and we are reducing the weight on the scale. Of course, the more we pump, the lighter it gets. We have different pressures and different float cylinders depending on the brush. The longer the brush, of course, the more the overall weight, but also the different pressures on this gauge. So we now see the weight scale is reading about 20 kilograms. That means the brush floats very lightly on those modules, as we saw earlier. So that's the process. It's a very simple hand pump, pulling fluid from the reservoir into the accumulator, resulting in pressure up through this float cylinder, reducing the weight on the scale. It's kind of a fun representation of how the system can work. I've actually kept on pumping past this 24 kilogram weight, just to show you how light the brush can get. So I can go with my right thumb, I can go under the brush, and I can lift the whole system up with one thumb. For anyone that believes the Sunbrush is too heavy, too dangerous for the panels, I want you to show them this video, because this just shows how light the Sunbrush can be and how easy it floats and how easy it works. As mentioned just out there, when we change brush length, we must also change that float cylinder, and we have different colors and different sizes depending on the brush we've installed. So for the 3-meter brush, the 10-foot brush, we have a 25mm cylinder. The 4.5 meter, 15-foot, we have the 35mm cylinder, and the 7.5 meter brush, we have the 40mm cylinders. We also, for the other brush lengths, kind of that fit between, we have different options depending on the brush length. Now, the distance we're measuring is actually the width of the ramrod in the cylinder. So that is the dimension that matters. But thankfully, they keep the colors constant between those brushes, so it can make it pretty clear. We also have the identical color as the cylinder spray painted on the bottom of the motor of the brush, so that it's easy to match. And of course, something that's important is with the operator's manual of a brush, it tells you which cylinders and which pressures to be operating at, and it also gives you an approximate pump volume, so maybe 100 pumps, 120 pumps, depending on the brush you've mounted on there. I hope that you're able to follow along with that. Hopefully you learned some theory as to how that works and actually seen the processes we use to pump up those pressures. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.